Hey everyone, it's Ryan Lizza with my friend Steve Schmidt here for our weekly Monday chat. Steve, you were just asking me while we wait for people to join us where the puppy is. And students of this weekly chat know that it is very frequently interrupted by Bodhi running across my keyboard, um, barking very loudly in the apartment here. And it's very quiet right now because Bodhi was sent to boot camp. Steve.
Mm.
Bodhi was sent to 2 weeks
Mhm.
with um, a former Israeli, IDF guy out in Virginia.
It's not
Um,
it's not the Borat character, right? He hasn't been swept up into a Sacha Baron Cohen. I'm
was
thinking
that a
back
plot?
like that old HBO series. It was Colonel
Was that a plot line? It was a puppy. It was a dog trainer.
he wasn't a dog trainer, but it was God, I'm trying to remember the name of the character. But
This
he did
guy.
interview Cheney. Um and he got Cheney to sign its waterboard.
Oh, yes, that's famous,
That
famous,
was
famous. I remember that.
yes.
Well, this guy comes highly recommended, and so poor little Bodie is out in rural Virginia for 2 weeks, and he's going to come back, the best behaved dog in DC. Knock on wood. But yeah, so I miss him. That's why he's not around. And then this Saturday, I'll go out there and spend the day um, absorbing the lessons and trying to translate this guy's training to me. What's
There's an
what's go?
old there's an old saying, Ryan,
Yeah,
that there's no bad dogs, only bad dog owners.
100% true. That is
It,
100% true. Anyone who's tried to train a puppy realizes that it's always your fault. It is always your fault because you have to be extremely disciplined and consistent. And I needed to recruit a little bit of help. So,
yes,
um, so
yes,
and
that's good.
that's where poor Bodhi is. I'll send some pictures. I'll have to send out some pictures in the next newsletter. What's been going on as we wait for people to join? Where are you? You look like you're in an undisclosed location here. This is not your normal background.
I'm in an undisclosed location. That's correct. An undisclosed location in the state of Utah
Oh,
this
in Utah
morning.
now. Okay.
I'm in Utah. Um, but some incredible baseball games this weekend. And,
Someone said, "Don't tell
as you
Christy about
know,
the puppy." We're
I'm
gonna
seeing
talk
a lot
Blue
of
Jays now.
Toronto Blue Jays fan. And I've seen a lot of Blue Jays games
Yeah.
this year, but one of the incredible pitching performances, really in the history of the major leagues, right? In a debut, a guy playing in his fourth game, Clay Savage, 22 years old, struck out 11 New York Yankees, five and a half no-hit innings. It was just one of the most incredible things to watch.
Wow.
My son was up at the game, just said it was just completely electric, right? From start to finish, incredible environment up in Toronto for the game against the Yankees, and now the Yankees backs against the wall. Game three in New York on Tuesday night. Watch the Mariners first playoff win in 24 years, quarter century. So a lot of stuff going on in baseball, and of course, um, Trump is invading Illinois, and he's using the Texas National Guard to do it. One of the things that I had talked about months ago, um, I recall saying these things, but you forget, you know, where exactly you said them and on what date. But
Yeah.
well could have been with you. And I had said at the time that really the constitutional crisis
Yeah.
that the country will be in is when you have National Guard that is federalized from red states, really serving as a political force, a militia, an occupying force on the basis of ideological affinity, or right, the big lie that Portland is under attack or Chicago is under siege. That when we cross that Rubicon, there you go. And so I think one of the great deficits in looking at everything that's completely evaporated over the course of our professional careers and our adult lifetimes is causality, cause and effect, right? That events are interconnected. They don't exist episodically as part of a daily political reality show, that everything is building towards something from something. And so when we look at the deployment of the military in violation of judicial orders in Oregon, when we look at the meeting with the generals, when we look at the violence being imposed by the state, the pronouncements and announcements, Stephen Miller's hatreds, the reporting that has focused on his power and his power with regard to the deployment of military force, when we look at Trump's zest to deploy the 82nd Airborne, the premier light infantry force in the world, into America's cities to fight his imaginary war, when we look at the totality of all of those things, we have come through the first slalom gates on the proverbial old ski race course here, and we are picking up speed, coming downhill towards an abyss, towards a place that nobody wants to contemplate, but that has been provoked and instigated after 10 years of building extremism by our out of control president, his henchmen and women, incompetent imbeciles and losers who will do anything because Donald Trump gave losers like them power. And there's no other person who would ever do that. And so they'll do anything to all of us for him. And I think that's what's going on in the country.
Well,
And
I
some good baseball.
well, you're absolutely right. And just to catch people up, if people are on the West Coast just waking up or haven't been paying attention to the news, what happened over the weekend is that a Trump appointed judge, and it's kind of interesting what happened here, Steve, is the original judge in this case was considered a liberal, and the Justice Department went in and asked him to recuse himself because his wife is involved in some activism around some of the issues in the case. And he probably didn't have to, but he did recuse himself. And then the case ended up in the hands of Karen Immergut. I hope I'm pronouncing her name wrong. A Trump appointee from the first term, and the case was the state of Oregon suing the Trump administration and saying, you cannot take over our National Guard and send them to Portland. Now, a lot of people thought originally that Immergut was going to be a friendly judge to the Trump administration. She wasn't. She wrote one of the most courageous decisions of the entire year. If people have not read it, you should go and read it. It's a 31-page decision. Um, a true act of bravery to stand up to this administration. A lot of judges wouldn't have done this, especially the deference that judges generally give the commander in chief, and specifically in a situation like this. For people who don't know the full story, once she told the administration it was illegal for them to take over the Oregon National Guard and send them into Portland, Trump immediately commandeered troops from California, National Guard troops he had already federalized within hours of this ruling, and had them on their way to Portland. Naturally, The state of California wasn't happy about this. Gavin Newsom joined the Oregon lawsuit and said, asked the same judge to extend her temporary restraining order to the California troops as well. There was an emergency meeting last night about this issue, and the judge immediately released a new restraining order, which might be worth just reading, because it's like, it's like having a child who finds a loophole. So you got to like strengthen, the rules, the rules at home. And defendants, this is Trump and Pete Hegseth, are enjoined from deploying federalized members of the National Guard in Oregon. And it applies to um, any members of the National Guard, any federalized members. So originally this was just about Oregon. Now she's saying everyone. What happened after that? And this is where it gets bad, Steve. And this is something that you've been talking about for a while. The governor of Texas, Governor Abbott, basically lent Trump a few hundred troops to let him do with them as he pleases. I have to say, if this were happening in a foreign country, if this were happening in Russia like 20 years ago, and Putin was like sending troops to one of the, one of the far off territories in the country, and the governor there was saying, no, you can't have them, and Putin kept trying to figure out ways to send troops into this territory, we would be describing this as a country falling apart, coming apart. Finally, the last thing, just to catch people up, um, Illinois now has sued President Trump over his effort to deploy National Guard troops in Chicago. So we're going to see if that case is going to be very important, and we'll see if the judge there does what this Trump appointed judge in Oregon did. So that's the latest. Where does it go from here, Steve? What do you think?
Well, you have two fights playing out, and they are happening in two different theaters fundamentally. So let's separate those. The first one is in Washington, D.C., and that's around the federal government shutdown. And that's
Yeah,
playing out between the Democratic leadership and the Trump White House. And then there is the use of the Army, and that's what it is. Once you federalize the National Guard, it's no longer the California National Guard, it's the U.S. Army by the time it gets to Oregon. And you have what is a fight playing out now between the Democratic governors and the administration. So let's take these two things separately. They're connected, but separate with regard to what comes next. The Democrats, of course, are correct about how terrible it will be for the loss of these health care subsidies. However, it's the
yeah,
wrong hill to fight on and or to die on. And that's an important concept because it's a die on the hill you choose to fight on type of fight where you can't give in. And in the end, the people who are affected by what Trump wants to do overwhelmingly are the Trump voters. And elections have consequences. So Chuck Schumer has architected a political strategy that is in essence a bailout of the red states that provision the aggression against the rest of the country. It's an untenable political position for a lot of different reasons. And if we're teaching a class about this 20 years from now, and we're trying to describe what it was like,
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to be saying that in 2025 and in the fall, there was a great healthcare crisis. There's a great crisis in the American state and questions around American liberty. And so, what the Democrats in Washington have to demand in a situation that has changed since the shutdown began, including events that A, are Stephen Miller's announcements of his hates and the use of force and the justifications, the escalations in Chicago and Oregon that the Democratic position in Washington simply be: you don't have the votes, and we demand these things stop in addition to. And so the Democratic position here as this shutdown goes on has to harden, it has to evolve, and it has to meet the moment where the moment needs to be met. And it's around a demand that these unconstitutional outrages and obscenities cease. And that's on the federal side. There's a different equation on the governor's side. And I think that I've thought a lot about America while watching, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of Blue Jays games this year in Toronto over the summer. And
Yeah.
it's a great team. Team. The Democratic governors need to be a team, and they need to put any rivalries aside for the 2028 presidential season and operate as such. And there are a couple of states that are of outsized importance here. Those are California, and those are New York, and Illinois, and New Jersey. But the big Democratic megastates, Oregon and Washington, and the governors of those states must meet. The Democratic governors must meet. The Democratic legislative leaders of those states must meet. And they must appreciate that they have to adopt a philosophy, not policies. And the philosophy is that the maximum abuse of power by the federal government and the Trump regime demands the maximum legal use of legal power. And so those states have the ability to enter into binding compacts with one another on everything from banking to 100 other issues that can thwart the federal abuses of power and protect a maximum number of citizens and derail the autocratic takeover and agenda. There's tremendous power in the teachers' funds, pension funds in California, the state employee retirement funds, the same in New York. This is why this governor's race in New Jersey is so important. But the blue state governors
Yeah.
have to get in a room, and the legislators in Illinois and in California need to investigate the abuses. What happened at that apartment complex can be investigated through the power of investigative committees of the Illinois legislature. And J.B. Pritzker should call the Illinois legislature into emergency special session. All of the Democratic states should call their legislatures in to a special session to deal with the exigent circumstances at hand. every opposition entity, group, organization in the country needs to stand ready. And soon, millions of people will be on the streets in common cause for the No Kings protests that are taking place very, very soon. And as Lincoln said, with public opinion, anything is possible. Without it, nothing is possible. And we must poison the waters of public opinion to rally the American people against these obscenities, this arrogance, these preening, lying federal officials who dare to point guns at us and abuse us when these people work for us. How dare they?
I um I agree with you. I think that the where we're headed, if these judges are overruled, if the Supreme Court steps in, first Monday in October, the Supreme Court, unfortunately, their term is starting. So we're going to have a season of extremely consequential cases at the Supreme Court that will test all of these presidential powers that Trump has asserted. And I assume relatively soon we'll have a decision about these temporary restraining orders and whether they'll allow them to remain in place. What what's going to happen, Steve, is he's going to push into more cities, more troops. The backlash against it is going to justifiably increase. I mean, there should be people in the streets after what happened in Chicago. And his goal is to, or Stephen Miller's goal, or whoever the fuck is convinced him that this is a good idea. The goal is to create violence and anarchy in American cities, in cities that are run by Democratic mayors. He wants to be able to invoke the Insurrection Act and essentially declare martial law wherever he decides there's a confrontation between the locals and federal troops. Um, and we're then going to go into the midterm elections with federalized National Guard troops across the country in college towns and Democratic cities, um, essentially under martial law through the Insurrection Act. And it won't matter what the truth is on the ground. I mean, if you peruse right wing media right now, you will see people who believe that Portland is completely on fire. This is what was so impressive about this judge's opinion, where she just very, very patiently went through the facts without calling Trump a liar, saying your justification for sending troops to Portland is just not true. There is no out of control protests that would justify this. The local police have this under control. Same thing with Chicago. You have these, Lenny Riefenstahl style right wing media propagandists like Benny Johnson accompanying Kristi Noem on Friday to Chicago while she stomped around the city and tried to generate, viral content, and people taking video of her with a few sad, looking protesters up against the wall, and these guys are there with their cameras posting this stuff online, describing their fellow Americans as terrorists. I don't know if you've caught any of this, but it's this, the ability of this administration and people like Noam and Bondi and Hegseth to recruit propagandists um, online who are willing to lie for them and willing to create the content and exaggerate what's going on in these cities is really, really scary. And Fox News, which every once in a while has a responsible moment, has just completely gone in that direction as a full-on propaganda arm of what these guys are doing. And that's the next thing to watch here. Is the Supreme Court going to let these lower court decisions stand, or are they going to strike them down and Trump is going to flood these cities once he's got that green light with National Guard troops?
I I'm going to say something, and it's going to be very dark. And yes, to everything you just said, that all of those things are of monumental significance. Um, and I want everybody. The one thing I don't want anybody to write on the comments is that there's not going to be elections. There are going to be elections. Right, there will be elections in this country. There's always been elections, and there will be elections. Over 10 years time, I I personally, when I've spoken, I have not tried to speak for a party, but rather to the moment, and done so in what I hoped were precise ways. And I remember being criticized in Chris Christie's book as being over the top in my commentary. And what he said I was over the top about was identifying Trump as a fascist. And we've built over years, over a decade, over 10 years, right, to this moment, right, that's happening right now. And what's happening right now is that 9 months into a presidency, you have militarized federal police that are acting as if they are part of a dystopian series like The Handmaid's Tale. And there was actually an episode in The Handmaid's Tale, I think in the second season, that shows as the country collapses, how the federal law enforcement cooperates. Now, I personally have always had a lot of respect for a federal agent, and I've known a lot of FBI agent, Secret Service agent, met some pretty incredible people. But what has happened here already is just a total breakdown, and I mean shattering and forever breakdown of trust between federal law enforcement and the American people.
Yeah.
Because federal law enforcement has presented itself dressed for war with long rifles, automatic weapons pointed at American citizens. And what's going to happen is an untrained and undisciplined, and if you saw, for example, in the hospital, one of Miller's men psychologically decompose, arrest the Chicago older woman,
Yep.
this violent outburst, the rage, and you've seen it over and over again. These ice men fumbling their weapons. They are losers, clowns, bottom of the barrel dregs. But what's going to happen? Because they feel powerful and they feel impunity. And lessons of history are clear. What Stephen Miller has intimated, what Donald Trump has promised, is in American Tiananmen Square. And 9 months in, today, it's clear that these men somewhere will open fire. And when they do, there will be a massacre. And that massacre will be blamed on the people who were murdered by their government. And then the information about the facts of that massacre will be censored under threats of retribution or punishment or lawsuits or licensure or whatever, but all of it accruing to the billionaire class or to the David Zassoff class, that if you tell the truth, will take something from you that you
Yeah.
care about more than the freedom of the American people, which is your shit. And
And,
thus, we are in a grave crisis. And that moment is coming. And you
and
can tell what we are building to by watching it. And so we should not
absolutely.
hide about what's coming. We should prepare for it. And we should prepare to deplore it, to denounce it, and to say, we will never abide in the United States of America living under a military occupation of American soldiers in the name of MAGA and Donald Trump. Never.
And that's why fighting these lawsuits and Congress during the shutdown fighting for what you just talked about, insisting that these troops are not deployed is so important, because once they have the green light, once they're on the ground, once they start stirring things up in liberal cities with people who have a lot of rage right now about what ICE is doing, bad shit's going to happen. And, we talk about a Kent State kind of situation coming. One thing that didn't happen during Kent State is you didn't have a president who goes on social media and repeatedly says that cops, military, etc., should do whatever they want. You didn't have a president whose very first act was to pardon violent insurrectionists who tried to destroy the Capitol on January 6th. You didn't have billions of dollars to recruit a new generation of ICE thugs. I apologize for using that word, but
Why? It's what
it
they are.
it fits, because it's not, because it makes me, it's, I don't like talking about federal, police officers that way. I've always had a deep respect for FBI agents and the police, and it hurts me to think that this is what's going on. They've got billions of dollars to recruit these people. Who do you think's signing up? Who do you think is
Losers.
signing up? And these guys are watching videos. They're watching that guy who threw the woman to the ground in New York. DHS actually, for once, put out a tough statement about that, said it was unacceptable.
Yeah.
The guy's back at work. They're watching this other loser in an emergency room having a conversation with an elected official who's there to protect her constituents, who grabs her. And look, I have to say, it's always men. It's always men. I haven't seen a single woman ICE agent, in one of these videos, and it's often men grabbing women. This guy grabs her. She was, extremely respectful. I don't know if people have watched this video, but it's this alderman in Chicago. And then they realized they had a little bit of trouble on their hands once they realized she was an elected official, and they did actually release her outside. But these guys have a green light from Trump to do anything they want because they know he will pardon them. He will pardon them. You could have ICE agents shoot a bunch of innocent people, and it will be on Fox News the next day saying they deserved it. They were protesters. They were illegal immigrants, criminals, terrorists, all the rest. And there will be an instant movement and GoFundMe campaign on the right to support these guys and pardon them. So they have a license to do whatever the hell they want. I think if anyone wants further evidence of this, read what these two federal judges did in these two cases recently. The Abrego Garcia case, where they approved Abrego Garcia's effort to show that he was vindictively prosecuted. I don't know how much people know about the law, but it is judges do not grant these things very often. If you go into court and say, "Oh, I'm innocent, this was a vindictive prosecution," the judges rarely agree with that. In Tennessee, this judge looked at the facts and said there was a campaign at the highest levels of the Justice Department and the White House to target this guy, to smear him, and that he likely was chosen for prosecution vindictively. In other words, they made it up, very likely. They called him a terrorist. They called him a criminal. They said he was trafficking people through Tennessee. It was all a lie. It was all a fucking lie. And, this got like 10 minutes of coverage last week. One more example. This judge, and I know you've heard about this or read about this, Steve, but this judge in Massachusetts, Bill Young, who wrote a 161-page opinion about the way that this administration targeted, smeared, abducted, and tried to send to foreign gulags a group of pro-Palestinian protesters, is one of the most astonishing documents I have ever read. If people haven't read this, it's 161 pages. Read it. The first half is just enormous detail about Rubio and Noam and these mid-level people at the Pentagon and DHS and the president just conspiring to destroy the lives of these protesters because they had views that are out of favor. The second half of that opinion, as I know a lot of people have on here probably know, is this judge just taking a step back and contemplating the crumbling of our constitutional order in general, and going after Trump in ways that you rarely see a federal judge go after a president. I don't mean in personal terms. I mean in his complete lack of respect for the rule of law. So if people have not read Bill Young's opinion, check it out. I have it linked in the last piece I wrote. I point out those two cases, one, because I want people to read them and they're important, but they show in excruciating detail how behind the scenes this administration will target people and destroy them publicly with absolutely no evidence. And it takes months for these guys to get their reputations back if they ever can. All right, that's the end of my rant.
These are profound abuses of power. Profound abuses of power. And we will in time know every detail of every abuse, every email, everything will be preserved and it will be known. I want to
One
say,
thing, Steve, one thing we have to flag for people. I don't know if you've seen this yet, but my buddy Joe Alter reminded me in our chat, and I don't have the latest, but right before we got on here, there's a judge in South Carolina
yeah,
who ruled against Trump on a voting rights issue. Diane, excuse me, make sure I have her name right.
Goodstein.
Diana Goodstein. Her house burned to the ground over the weekend.
Running out of battery.
Her house burned to the ground over the weekend. You can see the pictures online. Her husband evacuated family members from the house, jumped out a second story, ended up in the hospital with broken bones. She fortunately wasn't at home at the time. The whole house was destroyed. I don't know what the latest is. But you can imagine what the obvious speculation is about this. Um, so something to watch very, very closely. They are investigating it as a possible arson, but we're going to be in a bad, bad place if if this judge ruled against Trump on the day after Stephen Miller started attacking on Twitter judges as left wing insurrectionists. Her house went up in flames. And someone's asking if it was North Carolina. It was in South Carolina. Um, all right, Steve's getting some battery help.
Um,
His phone was.
I think
You gotta get the new iPhone for it's got a bigger battery.
um, I may be getting a Samsung product. Can't trust Apple and Tim Cook. Um,
Absolutely
let me
cowardly. Again, Steve, one of these issues that flicked across our screen and everyone moves on. But Apple has just been absolute Trump sycophants and making cowardly decision after cowardly decision. They still haven't said when they're going to release that show that was about right-wing extremism that they've now delayed. And now they've pulled Ice Block and these other apps from the App Store um, because the government asked them to.
Yeah, it's appalling.
Yeah,
It's appalling. You know, Ice Block is no different than Waze. And in a free society, you get to know where the police are, right? Now,
absolutely. And
here's the
someone points out,
deal,
is Google any better? They pulled it too. So no, they're not.
right? And you don't get to know where SEAL Team 6 is, right? But knowing where ICE is isn't classified, right? Knowing that the 82nd Airborne might be getting ready to jump into Detroit is not a secret. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I had the experience. I was not in the military. I had no military training, and I spent some time in Iraq in 2005. So it was October 2005. It's October 2005. So yeah, it was 20 years ago, like now. Um, and one of the first things that you appreciated in Iraq was that between the airport and the green zone, the 18-mile long road, which was called Route Irish and known as the Highway of Death, was not secure.
Yeah.
2 years into the war.
Yeah. Became
And
a huge
so
political issue for Bush.
so right, we have a 1 million-person military. It's very powerful, but it's not powerful enough to occupy the United States, whatever Trump's designs may be, right? There's a lot of soldiers that call these cities home. You saw the faces of the generals, right? You look at everything that's happening. You have to give consideration to the fact that everywhere there are people who understand that this is deeply wrong and who will subvert it and who will undermine it and who will stand with the people against a completely out of control administration. And the rest of our active lives in politics, right, I think are going to be spent really in remembrance of this moment, looking back, and the debates, all of them ahead, right? The issues that we deal with, many of them will be about restraining power to make sure
Mhm.
this never happens again, and make sure the power of the corporations and the campaign finance system and the accumulation of control over so many sectors of the economy is just completely broken up. We've entered a new era that calls for new solutions, and the first solutions have to be the solutions that remedy the abuses of power, and all of those things start with anti-corruption laws.
You were talking about reform.
Yeah, I look, the purpose of politics in America, so far as it applies to the actual human beings, the American citizen that lives in the country, has very, very little to do with the ambitions of the couple hundred people surrounded by a couple thousand staff and a couple hundred people surrounded by a couple thousand reporters at media organizations, right? The outcome, right, of who wins the election, what team, right? The era of vapid politics is just, it's over. And so the purpose of winning has to be to restrain the abuses. Do we want to live in a country where the president is a de facto king, and if he's a whack job enough, that he orders the army deployed on the basis of lies and fantasies with their weapons pointed at peaceful citizens? If you read what Stephen Miller has said, I think you're a fool if you don't believe that Stephen Miller would put you up against the wall at the first opportunity and not lose a wink of sleep about it, and think that he's a great patriot. This is a
It's-
very, very, very serious moment. The companies that have capitulated, from Apple to Disney, what's happened regarding this Paramount merger, the accrual of media power of the second richest man in the world and his son, the idea with Sinclair that, hey, and I appreciate the argument, right? Which is that you should be able to own as many TV stations as you want in a free country. Well, there was a counter argument to it. And it was, if you have that much concentration, many bad things can happen. And God forbid you have a merger between state and media entities. And so, for example, the era of tolerating Sinclair Broadcasting owning 105 local stations has to be at its end. They own like 5 stations. And so breaking up these companies, busting up the trusts, taking on the entrenched power and appreciating that losing the top of the hill to these people, forfeiting the castle, moving from the castle to the bottom of the hill, it's a lot harder to get back up that hill and take the castle than it was to defend it, proverbially speaking. But every aspect of this obscenity, from Trump's ballroom to the restoration of the Rose Garden to the seizure of the Qatari bribe jet, all of it
What are you going to
has to be dealt with.
What are you going to do with your Trump currency, Steve? You're going to stash it
Ah,
away so 100, 50 years from now, it's worth a lot. How many Trump coins will you be getting
it'll
at your
it'll
local bank?
they'll be selling it at some shithole rest stop like they do Confederate currency in a decade or so. Look,
He's going to be
this,
on. There will be a serious proposal in Congress. You've heard this already, for his face to be added to Mount Rushmore. That by the end of his term, if Republicans still control Congress, they will do it. And and you know what? Trump could just do it on his own. He's ruining the White House with the ballroom. He could go and ruin Mount Rushmore and sign some executive order and say it's necessary. It's going to happen.
I want to I want to say like this is the utmost importance, I think, as a campaign issue, and I'm very serious about this. There will be 100 things to talk about. Um, Here's two of them. I think that the nominee should say something like this in his speech. In 2000, George Bush, one of the lines he had in his campaign was, the second that I take the oath of office, I'm going to restore honor and integrity, right, to the Oval Office.
Yeah.
And and the version of that in 2028 is that one, I think the nominee should say is I have timed the gun salutes of the previous 20 inaugurations, and they last between 2 minutes and 40 seconds and 4 minutes and 10 seconds, which means I'll be able to sign between 15 and 27 executive orders before I even speak to the country. And the first one will be to fire that bug-eyed freak show as director of the FBI. That's number one. And then two, as that campaign proceeds all across the country, it's very important, right, for the next president to have an appreciation that the White House belongs to us and that Donald Trump had no damn right to do whatever the
He's
fuck he is that he did with it. And that I don't think that the ballroom will actually be built by the time we have the next inauguration. But whatever is there, whether it's a pit,
Oh, I
a
disagree.
foundation, whether it stands in its totality, that thing's going to be taken down, right? And that's going to be a primary issue. Restoration.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tolerate that obscenity. You know what it is? It's like a giant fucking tumor growing out of your forehead, right? Is what that ballroom is. And so the tumor will have to go. That predator patio will have to go.
Yeah.
And the rose garden will have to be restored, as will the meaning of freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of the press. And the penalty will be paid by the billionaire class, by the corporate CEO class. And they're going to pay for it with tax policy changes. And they're going to pay for it with an authentic type of populism that's harnessed to the good.
That's going
That
to be the balance. Yeah.
that balances this all out. And that's what's going to happen. So don't be afraid, everybody. Be grateful that you get to live in consequential times. Thomas Paine said, right? Thomas Paine said to the farmer who said, I want no trouble, right? I got a kid. And Thomas Paine said to the farmer chastising him that that's wrong. The patriot says, if there's trouble, let it be in my time. So the trouble has come, and everybody get ready to go out on the streets and protest. One of the things that's going to be very important this month is for so many scores of millions to appreciate again you're not alone, that we vastly outnumber the forces of the arrogant and the forces of the officious and the forces of MAGA that have been called on to point guns at the American people.
On this point, Steve, I want to end by reading how Judge Young in Massachusetts ended his 161-page opinion the other day. If you'll indulge me, and then we'll wrap up. He quotes Reagan: "Freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction. It is not ours by way of inheritance. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation, for it comes only once to a people." That's from Reagan's gubernatorial inaugural back in 1967. And this is Judge ending his opinion. This is Judge Young. I first heard those words of President Reagan's back in 2007 when my son quoted them in the Law Day celebration speech at Norfolk Superior Court in Massachusetts. I was deeply moved and hold these words before me as I discharge judicial duties. As I've read and reread the record in this case, listened widely, and reflected extensively, I've come to believe that President Trump truly understands and appreciates the full import of President Reagan's inspiring message. Yet I fear he has drawn from it a darker, more cynical message. I fear President Trump believes the American people are so divided that today they will not stand up, fight for, and defend our most precious constitutional values so long as they are lulled into thinking their own personal interests are not affected. He ends with this question: is he correct? Read the whole
He
opinion.
he is not correct if that is his opinion, and it is the biggest miscalculation that anybody who has ever been elected to political office has ever made. Donald Trump was elected with 49.5% of the vote. And he was not elected
Yeah.
to invade Chicago or Portland. He was elected to fix the economy and to secure the border. And what he's delivered is a broken economy that's headed into recession or worse. You already have 22 states in recession. You have massive civil liberties abuses from coast to coast. And you have the formation of an American Gestapo that feels the license to assault women and elderly people and to point weapons at unarmed civilians in the name of Donald Trump. We have a cabinet of whack jobs and wretchedness that defies description, that beggars the imagination. It is a Third Reich cabinet of losers. And it's important to understand that you have this unholy stew of collaboration between the greed of executives who look the other way, who tolerate, who get down on their knees and give away power, give away agency, who sell you out. The members of Congress who did the same, the anchor men and women who have done the same. It is appalling, but as you quote that judge, there is like a fire that burns in so many of us, right? That struggle with faith, that find a hard time attaching to a church, right? Or to a sermon. But in us, right, this faith that we have is an American one, and it's about freedom. And we will never, ever, 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 never, ever, fucking ever submit to Donald Trump and Stephen Miller labeling us terrorists because we dissent against their corruption, their lawlessness, their abuses of power, their abuses of American citizens, and their license that's not drawn from the Constitution, but from the insanity of their fever dreams that somehow they are Caesars setting about restoring a fallen empire. It's all bullshit. It's a psychosis, and it must be rejected, and it must be rejected by being confronted. And the political opposition in the United States had best appreciate, starting with the Democratic leaders, the deep intolerance of the American people for any compromise with people that are pointing guns to our heads, traditionally and in the moment.
Amen, Steve. Buckle up, everyone. It's going to be a crazy week and a crazy month. Things are going to be wild. September
Yeah.
was worse than August. It was worse than July. October is going to be a consequential month. We'll see everyone back here Monday at noon. Thanks, Steve. Have a great week.
Good to see you.